So thank you for that introduction. James and I are really excited to be able to share the MiYO concept with you today. And probably the first place to start is to kind of talk about how MiYO came about. So there has been a pretty big advancement in materials, especially with zirconia. It wasn't more than probably 3 or 4 years ago. We were talking about Bruxier, we were talking about high strength and very opacified zirconia materials. And in a very short period of time, we've advanced on to a different look in zirconia. So if you see this slide here on the right, that is a Emax HT ingot. And on the left, that's the new 5Y high translucency zirconia. This one happens to be the Imagine from Jensen. And when you transmit light through them, you see they're virtually transmitting light identically. And that's a huge evolution in materials. When we finally get a base material that's looking and acting more like all ceramic restorations, that opens up tremendous possibilities. So this is a case we did probably a couple years ago, right when these new materials came out. And if you look at the 2 molars on the left, these were made with the high strength, high opacious zirconia materials. And while the colors and everything are fine, tooth form is fine, we see that density that we've come to expect from this kind of material. And yet when you look at the slide on the right, by the way, these were made with the exact same design file, so they're identical in every way. These are two first and second molar made with the high translucency zirconias, and we begin to see that there's a light transmission here very similar to that of high translucent ceramic materials, or more importantly, like a natural tooth. So when we compare the first and second molars on the right side to that natural tooth, the second bicuspid, we begin to see very, very similar light dynamics. And this began to open the doors for us for all different possibilities with monolithic restorations.
And that's pretty really impressive. The fact that it's the same exact file. It's really cool. So what really are the limitations and the possibilities? In the anterior region, the posterior, we saw that we're very close to nature, and we have to challenge ourselves with the anterior region. So this case was done as a comparison study, and we tried to push the aesthetic limitations using today's high translucent zirconia. So we could see the tissue is in pretty good condition, and the stump shade is also fairly normal. Here, what you see is a 0.5 millimeter cutback on a multi-layer zirconia, directly characterized on the zirconia and layered with conventional ceramics, finished on the model, and intraoral. Here's a direct comparison of the monolithic and layered. We could get into micro details and pick out some minor flaws, but overall, we could clearly see that we are getting pretty close to achieving high aesthetics, even on monolithic restoration.
And this is obviously, James, this is the most difficult thing as ceramists we're asked to do, match a single central. Some of the advantages of being able to work in monolithic is, that we create the details right on the surface and we know exactly what they're going to be. The limiting factor has always been the aesthetics of the base material itself.
Yeah, and the surprising and the more realization here is the clear realization here is the talking distance. We could not tell the difference.
Yeah. So this really opened the door. The change in material science and the advancement in particular of zirconias really opened the door for the MiYO concept. And so here's how we looked at MiYO. Obviously, going into the MiYO project, James and I looked at what was available to us in the way of stains and glazes and really looked at them critically and try to understand what was good and what wasn't good. And the reality is stains and glazes have been with us for a very, very long time, and they were really designed to enhance our layered restorations in various ways. And so we sat back and we said, if we were going to develop a system that was specifically designed to make monolithic restorations look like natural teeth, what would we need? And so rather than being restricted by the old concepts around stain and glaze, we sat down and really started penciling out what would we like to have and what kinds of characteristics would we like to have in a system that would help us then create restorations in monolithic that looked not only like layered restorations, but started to approximate the aesthetics that we see in natural teeth. And that was really the task before us.
So let's start with the color overview. The system contains really two components. One is color and structure. There's about 18 colors and glaze paste and 5 structures in this system.
So there's really, within the colors, there's 3 different translucencies. The color system is set up in many ways very much like a normal layering ceramic system where we have opacious dentins, enamels, things of that nature. And the big differentiator between those materials is just the degree of opacity or translucency.
So we got the opacious colors. Mamelon is also opacious. Then we got the semi-translucent colors, which are halos. And the rest being high translucent colors. So again, there are 3 translucency levels, 6 opaque colors, 2 semi-translucent, and 10 high translucent colors. Total of 18 colors, 5 structures, and a glaze paste.
And then there's the structure material. And we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about structure later, but as you can see in this picture, we wanted a material that would allow us the ability to, by virtue of its name, create structure, create elements, 3-dimensional elements that we see in natural teeth. And we broke the structure material down into very similar to the colors in that we have some which are very translucent, like the window. The ghost would be more of a milky, higher value material, enamel, which is exactly what it sounds like, and ice and blush, a bluish and a pinkish color. And we'll show you a little bit more about what's unique about structure as we go forward. But first, we'll get into a little bit more detail about the colors and how we use them.
So the basic task that we have to face every day is adjusting color and intensity. And what you see, the shade tabs you see here is 2 shades apart from each other. And we wanted to kind of push what we could do with just the translucent A that we have in the system. And as you could see in this photo, we were able to match the target shade of A3 even with the OM2. And just to make sure that the tabs, these are shade tabs and they're not ceramic and these are not fired. So it's
yeah, they're just wet. So, yeah. And I mean, that's important because people obviously will say, well, how many coats did you put on? How much color did you have to apply to build that up? And like James said, these are plastic tabs, so clearly not fired. And this is a very simple, thin application of 1 coat. And even the OM2, pretty good match for an A3.
So you can see here, we started with the A1, a multi-layer A1, and reached somewhere between A3 and A3.5
Yeah.
with 1 firing. So here's a short video. We want to show you a demonstration and introduce the application method of MiYO colors to match a simple shade tab. So before I start, the value is always slightly brighter before the glaze, and I apply the glaze and verify my starting point. Okay, and I'll be using translucent A here. You could see me float the color on top of the existing glaze paste. So there's different methods of MiYO application. Here I'm showing one application method by putting a thin layer of glaze paste before all the colors, because my intention is to glaze and finish everything with one shot. So you could see the color application is more of a dab and drag application, more of a paste opaque.
So just to be clear, James, I mean, because there's several ways to do this, as you mentioned. I mean, you cover the entire surface with glaze first. Um, there, I think it's important to make sure people understand these colors are self-glazing. You don't need to use a glaze paste with them. We cover the entire surface just in case we don't cover everything with a MiYO color. So that the finished restoration is completely glazed, even in areas where MiYO color hasn't been applied.
Yep, you're exactly right. And once I'm satisfied with the base color, then I will move on to the incisal 1/3, and I will start to lower the value using smoke here. And then you could intensify with the storm on the corners, or you could, if you're satisfied, I move on with the halo. I finish all my restoration with the halo effect. And the halo effect actually brings all the colors kind of come together. So here is me applying the halo, and as you can see, I'm just floating right on top of all the existing colors. I'm pretty satisfied with the shade tab that I'm looking at.
And again, that's an A2, James?
That's an A2.
Yeah.
And verify in different directions, different angles.
So in this case, we were going from an A1 to an A2.
A1 to an A2. A simple task that we have to deal with every day in our labs. And here is the fired restoration. And verified next to the shade tab.
So one of the keys with the MiYO colors that's very important is, unlike stains, which are highly opacified pigments, MiYO color is very translucent. The colors are suspended in a ceramic matrix, and the overall translucency of the colors is completely different than anything you would achieve with a stain and glaze technique.
So we all know going darker in color is pretty common in our practice, everyday practice in our labs. But how about going brighter in value? Now we really have a solution in just a bottle. And here is translucent lumen.
So going brighter is something that's always escaped us. And one of the issues with going brighter is when we get a restoration, there's too much color or the value's too low. Traditionally we have to grind back the surface and then add a whiter, more opaque material to kind of mask everything underneath and bring the whiter, higher value into play. The problem with that is it almost always results in a more opaque, deader looking restoration. So our goal with MiYO was to create something where we get that white, bright effect without adding opacity.
And even going high translucent with added color. And now you could see the crown on the left was about A3, A3.5. And using lumen, we were able to raise the value without compensation and opacity. To describe the characteristics of lumen, Don, you really said it the best. When you look at a cloud from far away, it's white and high value. But when you get close, all it is just vapor. And this describes lumen as white, but also high in translucency.
When you compare those two, you see that the shift in value is there. It goes from high chroma to lighter chroma. Maybe, I don't know if it's an A1 or an A2, but you clearly see the shift.
So here's a short video of lumen application, and it's really my personal favorite color. And in this video, we will demonstrate the ability of this color as just as we described. Again, take a look at the application method. I'm putting the glaze paste just like the previous video. So my target shade is a one full shade brighter, which is an 0 and 3 from an A1 restoration. And again, I'm floating the color on top of the existing glaze paste. And you can see I'm just moving the colors around. It's very flexible. It's very elastic, almost like a latex paint, just like what Don described. What I'm doing here, I'm just moving the color around. I'm making sure what I see is an even distribution of color on the surface of the zirconia. So it's really like a paste opaque application, but it's in translucent colors. And as I go, I verify with the shade tabs. And I will continue to move the colors around, apply a little bit more. And as soon as I'm happy with the body shade, I would move on with the incisal 1/3 again with the storm. Excuse me, it's smoke. And it's a subtle, smoke is more of a subtle color. It's more of a gray violet. And it's a little bit more user-friendly. And here is the halo application, highlighting all the colors together, bringing all the colors together. And again, I'm floating the halo right on top of all the wet colors. Okay. And then verify with the shade tab before firing. Just the final little touches and after firing.
What would you say the overall thickness is, James? It's like less than 1/10 of a millimeter?
Yeah, really less than 0.1. And here is the shade tab next to it. Okay. So of course, we cannot forget to mention about dropping value. And to drop value, there's two colors in the system, which is smoke and storm. Smoke, like I mentioned previously, it's a gray violet. Uh, it's very subtle. It's user friendly. And storm is intense blue. So I usually use the storm on the corners to mimic that transparency of the natural enamel. Okay, so I get a lot of questions on using MiYO with different materials like lithium disilicate, and the answer is yes, it's absolutely possible. The model you see here was done on a fully pressed lithium disilicate.
So it really comes down to CTE. Most of your zirconias are somewhere in the 10.0 to 10.3 range. Lithium disilicate, very, very similar. So the CTE of the MiYO material is perfectly matched to this range of materials. So yeah, you can use it with any zirconia. You can use it with lithium disilicate, lithium silicates, a variety of different brands that are now on the marketplace with slightly different chemistries. This MiYO material works exceptionally well on all those materials.
Yeah, even using as an internal characteristics for your layer restorations it works perfect. I also got some questions like, can you create all these effects on a high strength, high opaque zirconia as well? And the answer is again, yes. The photo here is colored with MiYO on a high opaque zirconia, which is used mostly for all-on-4 and all-on-6 cases.
So when you look at the picture on the left, you see the central split down the middle. What does MiYO give us? MiYO is beginning to give us now the ability to take a very monochromatic restoration, whether that's a pressed ceramic or it's a milled zirconia. The underlying base, I think, in this one was like an A1 multi-layer. But in general, they look fairly monochromatic. And when you look at the central on the left side, and again, you look at the detail on the right, you begin to see color and contrast uh, similar to what we would expect to see when we layer normal ceramics. Remember, we talked about the colors having 3 different opacity ranges, and it's those differences in opacity, those differences in intensity of color that help us to create the contrast that you see, the movement of light that creates the illusion that these are 3-dimensional teeth.
And of course, the learning curve in the conventional ceramic systems, it's quite big.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we get from MiYO and people that are using the MiYO system immediately recognize is it takes the learning curve more or less out of the equation. I mean, here you see a picture of a schematic for layering different enamels, and all of us who have been doing ceramics for any period of time know that that takes a long time to learn. You know, when I use this or I use that, what am I going to get? And even in the hands of the best ceramists, we have a pretty good sense maybe of what we're going to get, but it doesn't always turn out 100%. And being able to eliminate that unknown is what MiYO brings to the table, and we'll be able to demonstrate that a little more clearly to you here in some of the next coming slides.
So there's a couple videos that we want to show, and this video will really demonstrate floating color on top of color. And whatever you see here before firing, you will get with MiYO system.
So I think it's you know, the concept of floating color on color is really an important characteristic of this material, James. I mean, what you're going to see James doing here. I mean, right now you've got your A shade in the body. You've laid down your canvas in the incisal 1/3 with the smoke. This is all wet, and now you're applying your mamelons directly over a wet canvas of gray smoke, of the smoke color.
Yep. And I intensified the corners with the storm, and I'm just moving the colors around and shaping it the way I think it makes sense.
So that very unique characteristic. The viscosity of the material is such that you can literally lay layer upon layer upon layer of color. And the beauty of that is that you can create an entire application of effects in just one shot, and be able to see everything that you want to see before you fire it. And we'll talk a little bit later on about, we'll demonstrate the what you see is what you get concept, but floating color on top of color is one of the most critical and one of the key characteristics of the MiYO system.
So here I have about 6 colors, and now I'm applying the halo before I finish the restoration. And as you can see, I float the color, and some areas I would blend it with the existing colors, and some areas I would leave it sharp.
So here you're just applying a more opaque halo material directly over the more translucent storm blue and the
existing mamelon colors as well.
Right.
So the ultimate example of floating color on top of color is when you're making fine details like the crack lines. And as you can see here, I just put a bed of color, and I'm going to start to move the color around and shape the crack line the way I think it makes sense.
So these colors don't mix. You can apply, as I said, color on top of color. But when you want to mix them, as you see James doing here, it's very easy to do.
And whatever you see, wherever you put it, it stays there, which is a very nice characteristics.
Yeah, when people use the MiYO for the first time, especially the colors, one of the things they always comment about is it doesn't collect at the margins. It doesn't run. It doesn't puddle. It doesn't start to gather, run away from the surface and gather in certain areas like a stain or a glaze would do.
Yep, so now I'm just putting the final details, a little bit that extra of effects that will create a little bit more of a contrast. I'm just putting the final touches.
And again, all of this is wet.
All of it is
Nothing
wet.
has been fired yet.
And putting crack lines on top of all the wet colors is really easy now without puddling, right? And here you see the starting point of this slide the starting point was the unshaded high translucent zirconia, the photo on the right, and photo on the left is about 10 colors I put on, and all wet, uh, all with one shot with colors.
So that bridge has not been fired. All the details, all the effects that are on there, James, are all wet, all done in one application.
Yeah, and I feel confident because the color will not shift
Right.
during the firing cycle. Okay.
So the ability to float color on color is one of the important characteristics. The other concept of what you see is what you get is also a very, very important characteristic. And this is achieved by making sure that the materials appear in the wet stage exactly as they will appear once they're fired. So when you look at the central in the box there that says before firing, and then you compare that to the central in the right side that says fired, you virtually see almost 100% exactly identical. There's no shift, there's no change. Again, whatever you see, whatever you imagine, if you're looking at it in the wet stage and you like what you have, you can have 100% confidence that once it's fired, that's what you're going to get.
And I think for me, the missing link with all the conventional previous stain systems out there is the final texture and the structure we have. We could create the texture that we want as a ceramist and a technician.
So you're right, James, and one of the things that we see in monolithic, regardless, I mean, we can texture green state zirconia, we can put in all the texture we want. Once that gets sintered, some of that's gone, but a lot of it will remain. The problem is the moment you start to add anything to the surface, a lot of that texture is gone. And so, one of the very critical elements of the MiYO system was, how do we get that texture back? How do we create surface texture and morphology and structure similar to what we expect when we do a normal layering material? And so the concept of a structure building material was what we came up with.
Yeah. And as you can see here, this slide is wet. Everything, all the texture and all the grooves and all the anatomy is done with just a brush.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And when you look at that up close, in this picture here, you see this, again, this is the same bridge. Everything you see there, this is an unfired restoration. So just to be clear, the colors were fired and fixed. Okay, that is an absolute necessary part of the process. Get those colors, the MiYO colors, fired, and then apply the structure, which is a very viscous ceramic material that can be put on as thin as 1/10 of a millimeter or less. And the only purpose for the structure is to create that surface texture. And so if you see that box on the right side there, that's a close-up view of the section of the central, and you see the pericomata, you see all that little structure, all put in wet with a brush.
All with the brush. And here is the fired look. So the structure fires glazed. Every time you fire it, it will glaze. But you could grind it just like a regular ceramic. You could polish it like a regular ceramic. There's a lot of freedom there with micro thickness.
Yeah, and I think what's really unique about structure is, again, if you look at the box on the left and you look at the box on the right, you see virtually the exact same level of detail on the surface. And yet, as James said, this is coming right out of the ceramic furnace, and you see the level of glaze. So to be able to glaze something and at the same time all that surface detail remains is really, really unique about this material.
So here is before fired and after fired. So now we saw the ability of MiYO colors and structure. The ultimate test is in the intraoral cases.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, we want to share with you a case, but this was a case we did, about a year ago?
Yeah, when we were first developing the system.
Yeah, so we had a handful of colors. We had some prototypes in the structure material. But we were very excited. James and I had to give a presentation in Chicago a year ago, and we were very excited to kind of see where we were at and make sure that the direction we were going was the right direction. And so we had an opportunity to do this 4-unit anterior case, and we wanted to make a direct comparison between what we could do monolithically against what we could do with a traditional layering technique. So the box you see on the right, that's our target shade in terms of characterization for the teeth.
And here's my starting point. It's a polished high translucent zirconia on the colored dies, finished with color on one side, on both sides, and then with structure.
And all that surface texture you see was put in with a brush.
It's just with the brush. And yet, as you can see here, the starting point, there is no texture. And you could take a close look at that black triangle as well. The gap there, I also filled in with the structure.
Right.
So all the texture, the color, everything with the MiYO system and intraoral.
So we want to compare that to traditional layering techniques. So you can see here we reduced about 0.5 millimeter, which would be a pretty generous enamel layer. All of the, we're not going to go into detail about what we did in terms of enamel, but kind of the normal sectional buildup for enamel, segmental buildup for enamel, using different colors, opals and whatnot. There's our cutback, and what I'm going to do is use the MiYO color to characterize the surface. And that's what you see here in this slide. All the characterization is achieved there, and then over the top of that we apply the enamel, and then we glaze it, and we're ready to compare that in the mouth. So there's our traditionally layered restorations in the mouth, and of course what the most interesting thing is looking at how does the layered restoration compare to the monolithic or vice versa.
I mean, the aesthetics I think were pretty close, but the time that we spent was a huge difference.
And again, this was about a year ago before we actually even had, we only had maybe 3 or 4 colors we could work with. So, but we were very excited by the potential. And it, obviously took us down the road further and spent the last year putting everything else together. Here you see those with the polarized lens. You see the true color very, very closely.
So I would really like to proudly introduce to you the MiYO Pink system. And I really think with the pink system now, the MiYO became a full system.
Yeah, I mean, as we got further down the road with the Crown and Bridge, we were very excited about the possibilities, and clearly there's a growing demand for all-on-4, all-on-6, full upper implant-supported kind of restorations. And so we started down this road with MiYO Pink, and we ran back to Liechtenstein to get to Michael and started the development, and we had a lot of help from Luke Hasagawa. Big shout out to Luke.
Yep.
Luke, phenomenal technician with these kinds of restorations, and he had a lot of concepts around colors, and he was very, very instrumental in from a concept point of view of helping us and giving us direction there. So what's interesting is when you look at the little picture on the left, this was early in the development. We literally did the colors in about a week, and in the first couple of days as we were working with the different pink colors, this was a little test module, and we kind of started putting the colors on there and moving them around, and then James and I looked at each other and said, wow, look what we can do with this stuff.
And look how thin it is.
Yeah, and the level of detail you can create. If you look at that picture in the box, you see veins, you see all kinds of crazy stuff. We could never do that in a million years, no matter how hard we try with layering materials. You just can't get that level of detail.
Yeah. It's a huge benefit. And so the system includes 9 colors in total. We kind of went opposite with the pink colors. The 6 colors are dense in opacity, and 3 are high in translucent colors.
And then there's what, three structure
Yes,
materials.
3 structure materials.
Right.
So here is a quick time lapse of the whole application of the MiYO Pink and MiYO Teeth.
So bringing the whole system together and showing it
Yes,
to you in
in a quick time lapse.
quick time lapse.
So this is a high opaque, high strength zirconia. First, I put all the colors, all the necessary colors for the teeth, and I will fire that, but you don't have to. Only reason I fire that is because I didn't have a handle and I needed somewhere to hold on to. So I fire that with all the teeth done, colored, and then move on to the tissue.
Right. And one question that comes up is how many times can you fire the MiYO without losing something? And this is not like some of the things you see out there, some of the ceramics you see out there where multiple firings the color starts to fade or the value starts to drop. Nothing will change with MiYO.
Yeah, so I finished. Now I'm doing the structure on the teeth. And here is another way of doing it. I didn't spend too much time. I built the thickness and I'm going to start grinding the surface texture the way I want, just like the conventional ceramics.
So you can put the texture in wet if you want, or you can just generally get it on and then fire it and then texture it the conventional way.
Yep. And once I'm done with the texture, I move on to the structure on the tissue. And you can see how thin that is. Only reason is really for surface texture.
And you just stippled that tissue with a brush?
With the brush, with the old beat-up brush, and that was
it. Beat-up brush. So you see how it started, and you see it evolve into a finished MiYO restoration.
And that's the finished one. And then the texture you see on the tissue is all done with just a brush.